There's a kind of silence that only exists in small towns after dark. Porch lights hum, cicadas fade, and every sound feels amplified: a distant truck, a closing diner door, the soft crackle of gravel under tires. On the night of July 17th, 1997, 16-year-old Haley Corbin clocked out of her shift at the Blue Plate Diner in Red Hollow, North Carolina, a tight-knit town where most people knew each other by name, and missing persons were something that happened elsewhere. Haley called her mom at 9:12 p.m. to say she was on her way home. The drive should have taken 12 minutes, but Haley never walked through the front door. Her car was found the next morning, not crashed, not abandoned in the woods, but carefully parked outside a crumbling, long-abandoned textile mill. Her purse was inside. The driver's seat was pulled forward, like someone shorter had been behind the wheel. No fingerprints, no struggle, no signs of Haley. For years, theories swirled like smoke. Had she run away? Was it a secret boyfriend? Or did a predator stalk that quiet stretch of road? The case grew colder with every passing season until 22 years later, when demolition crews tearing down the old mill made a gruesome discovery sealed inside a rusted drain pipe. It would finally unravel a truth more disturbing than anyone in Red Hollow imagined, and reveal why Haley never made it home. But why did the killer leave her car so neatly placed? And what was it about that textile mill that drew Haley or her abductor there? If stories like this grip you like they do me, hit that like so more true crime lovers can find it. Comment where you're watching from. You're part of this true crime family now. And subscribe. It fuels this channel to bring you more stories just like this one. To understand what really happened that night, we need to go back to where it all began. Haley Corbin wasn't the kind of girl who vanished. She was 16, soft-spoken but sharp, waitressed after school to help her single mom with bills. She ran track, volunteered at church, kept her pager clipped neatly to her purse, and always came straight home after her shifts. Red Hollow wasn't big, but it was big enough for the kind of whispers that stick. Haley knew better than to give them fuel. So when she didn't come home the night of July 17th, 1997, her mother, Lynn Corbin, knew instantly something was wrong. By midnight, Lynn had called the sheriff's office. By dawn, the town woke up to missing person flyers on every post and diner window. Haley's maroon Saturn SL was found just after 7 a.m. by a delivery driver taking a shortcut behind the shuttered Red Hollow textile mill. The car was parked neatly by the loading dock, doors locked. Her purse sat in the passenger seat. Her name tag was still clipped to her apron, folded on the back seat, but something was off. Haley was 5'7", yet the driver's seat had been adjusted far forward, uncomfortably close to the wheel. A detail that stuck with responding Deputy Rob Edens. It looked like someone shorter had driven it, he noted in his report. Not Haley. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. Her pager had one unread message from a coworker named Troy, sent at 9:03 p.m. just minutes before she clocked out. Security cameras at the diner showed her leaving at exactly 9:07, purse slung over her shoulder. She smiled at someone off camera and walked toward the lot. That was the last known sighting of Haley Corbin. At first, the search effort was massive. Hundreds of volunteers swept the woods behind the mill. Dogs were brought in, and divers searched the nearby creek. Nothing. Not a thread of clothing. Not a footprint. It was as if Haley had been erased between the diner and the decaying walls of that factory. Investigators interviewed every employee at the Blue Plate Diner. Several said Haley had mentioned being tired, stressed about an upcoming exam, but nothing seemed alarming. Her manager, Karen Mullins, said Haley was polite, quiet, dependable, and had never mentioned trouble at home or work. She'd never had a serious boyfriend, at least none that anyone knew of. Then there was Troy Garrison, the line cook who'd paged her that night. 22 years old. Lived with his parents. No record, no known issues. But co-workers described him as a little too friendly with the younger servers. According to police, Troy claimed he paged her to remind her she'd left a bracelet in the kitchen earlier that week. He said he never saw her after she left. His alibi? He was drinking with friends by the river, 5 miles away. 3 friends backed him up. No evidence tied him to the scene. No prints in the car. No motive. He was never charged. Lynn Corbin never stopped searching. She posted in missing person forums, wrote to psychics, filed public record requests. She even returned to the mill every Sunday for 3 years, just sitting in her car, staring at the building where her daughter's car had been left. I kept thinking, why here? She'd never go near this place. She hated it. It always gave her the creeps, Lynn once told a local reporter. But someone brought her here. Someone wanted her not to be found. Whispers ran wild. Some said Haley ran off with a trucker. Others believed it was a serial predator, someone passing through. There were even rumors about satanic rituals at the old mill, fueled by teenagers sneaking in and posting grainy Polaroids of dead animals and candles, but none of it led anywhere. Police followed tips, rechecked records, ran DNA swabs on multiple suspects. Every lead fizzled. By 2001, the case was officially cold. For over 2 decades, the mill sat untouched. A skeleton of a building, half-collapsed roof, shattered windows, kudzu strangling its brick exterior. It became a teenage dare spot, a haunted landmark. But underneath all that rust and memory, it had been hiding something that would surface in 2019. Demolition of the mill was part of a local revitalization push, a grant-funded project to turn the space into a farmer's market and community center. On October 9th, a construction crew hit an obstruction while tearing up concrete near the east loading dock. It was a large, sealed industrial drain pipe, capped with rusted bolts and half buried in dirt. The pipe wasn't in any of the original blueprints. When the crew finally cracked it open, the stench hit first stale metal and rot. Inside was a mildew-stained nylon backpack. A faded blue plate diner name tag was the first thing they saw. Haley's name, still visible through the grime. Beneath it, a cracked Motorola pager, its screen spidered. A spiral notebook, water damaged beyond recognition, and a small smear of dried blood along the inner lining. That blood, after 22 years, was still enough for modern forensics to pull a partial DNA profile. And that profile matched someone who no longer lived in Red Hollow. In fact, he hadn't been there in over 18 years. Troy Garrison. The former line cook, now 44, was serving a 5-year sentence in Tennessee for aggravated assault after a 2016 bars fight left a man with permanent brain damage. He was already in the system, and when investigators showed up to question him about Haley Corbin, his response stunned everyone. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't deny anything. He simply said, "You found the drain pipe, didn't you?" Troy Garrison had always been a footnote in the investigation, a name mentioned early, then dismissed. He was just a cook, older, a little off, but not enough to raise flags back in 1997. Red Hollow didn't exactly have criminal profilers on standby. They had Sheriff Rayburn, 2 deputies, and a whole lot of assumptions, and Troy knew it. When cold case detectives sat down across from him at the Riverbend Correctional Facility in October 2019, they expected pushback, maybe some deflection, maybe even anger. What they got was a man who'd been waiting, expecting this moment for years. The room was quiet except for the buzz of the recorder. Detective Owens began carefully. "Do you know why we're here today, Mr. Garrison?" Troy leaned back, smiled faintly. "It's about Haley, ain't it?" A pause. Then, "You found the drain pipe, didn't you?" That one sentence shifted everything. Over the course of 2 interviews, both recorded, Troy laid out a version of events no one wanted to hear, least of all Lynn Corbin. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was small, almost mundane, and that's what made it sickening. He said Haley had turned him down, twice. The first time, it was a joke. He asked her out after closing. She laughed it off. But the second time, she told him to stop, told Karen, the manager too. Troy was written up. He said that embarrassed him, made him feel small. He claimed he didn't plan anything. That on July 17th, he saw her leave the diner and something in him just snapped. He followed her, headlights off, in his dad's truck. Said she pulled over behind the mill because she thought he was a cop. He flashed his brights. She got out. He claimed he didn't mean to hurt her. "I just wanted to scare her," he told them. "Make her listen for once." But what happened in the minutes that followed was anything but innocent. According to Troy, he grabbed her arm. She pulled away, hit him in the face with her purse. He pushed her hard. She fell, struck the back of her head on a concrete divider. Said she was breathing, but out cold. Panicked, he picked her up, carried her through the rusted side door of the mill, a place he knew from his childhood. He laid her on a tarp in the old storage room. Said he sat there for an hour, listening to her breathe, waiting. By dawn, she was dead. I didn't know what to do, he said. I thought about calling someone, but what was the point? So he hit her. He dragged her down to the east loading dock where a section of sealed drainage pipe jutted out behind a wall of shelving. It was never used, just capped and forgotten. He stuffed her belongings in her backpack, wiped the pager, and slid it inside with the rest. But Haley herself? He claimed he moved her later, buried her deeper, where no one would find her. When asked where exactly that was, he went quiet. Somewhere no one's looking, he muttered. And I'm not telling, not yet. The confession gave the investigation new life. But it wasn't enough for closure. Troy wouldn't say where Haley's body was, and without it, prosecutors faced an uphill battle. The DA's office needed to prove murder, not just manslaughter, not just panicked disposal, intent, malice, something more than a moment of rage. So investigators kept digging. They re-interviewed old co-workers. One waitress, Dana, said she remembered Haley crying in the bathroom 2 weeks before she vanished. She said Troy was making her uncomfortable. Said he followed her to her car once. I told her to tell the boss. I don't know if she did. Another employee, the dishwasher at the time, said he remembered seeing Troy near Haley's car on the night she vanished. Didn't think anything of it back then. Just figured he was getting something from the dumpster. The original police notes made no mention of this. Either it was never said, or never written down. But the most damning evidence came from Troy's own home. Or rather, his parents' house. Investigators secured a warrant and searched the crawl space beneath the old shed where Troy used to work on bikes and lawnmowers. Buried beneath loose floorboards, a bundle wrapped in duct tape. Inside, a page from Haley's spiral notebook, her handwriting still legible, along with a disposable camera containing undeveloped film. The photos were mostly blurry trees, a creek, maybe some of her track team, but they were dated July 16th, the day before she vanished. They also found traces of her blood inside the truck Troy had driven in 1997, now rusted and stored on cinder blocks. The blood matched the DNA from the backpack. Combined with the confession, it was enough. Troy was charged with second-degree murder. Lynn Corbin sat in the courtroom on the day of the indictment. She hadn't seen Troy since the day detectives told her he was being questioned. She expected to hate him, to scream, to cry, but when he was brought in wearing shackles, head down, all she felt was emptiness. They say you feel relief, she told a reporter. But it wasn't relief. It was like standing in the middle of a tornado that already passed. Nothing left to destroy. Troy entered a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence, 20 years to be served consecutively after his current one. He would be eligible for parole in 2041. Lynn gave a victim impact statement. She was 16, she said. She never got to drive to college, never got to see snow again, never had a first love, never knew what it meant to live past fear. And all because you didn't like being told no. Troy didn't look at her. Not once. But despite the trial, despite the conviction, one question remained. Where was Haley? Troy refused to give the final piece, said it was his to keep. Some thought it was leverage. Others believed it was guilt, or maybe shame. Sheriff Rayburn called it a final act of control. Even in prison, he wants to hold something over us. Searches resumed. Cadaver dogs combed the area near the mill. Old sewer maps were re-examined. Psychics wrote letters. Drones scanned thermal readings in nearby woods. Still, nothing. Haley's body has never been found. And that left Red Hollow suspended somewhere between grief and justice. For most of Red Hollow, the case of Haley Corbin had always felt unfinished, like a book torn in half and buried on a shelf. The years didn't bring clarity. They brought distance, silence, and a quiet, aching acceptance that the truth might never come. Between 1998 and 2019, the town moved on in small, reluctant ways. The Blue Plate Diner shut its doors in 2002, a casualty of a highway bypass that drained local business. Haley's high school held a candlelight vigil every July for a few years, then stopped. Lynn Corbin relocated to Asheville in 2006, saying Red Hollow had too many ghosts and not enough answers. But for detectives who had worked the case in its early days, it never really went away. In 2009, a task force revisited 10 unsolved disappearances across rural North Carolina. Haley's case was one of them. A new team reviewed the original file's 14 boxes of reports, interviews, dead leads, and one sealed envelope labeled Anonymous Tip 1998. That tip had come by mail, postmarked from Charleston, West Virginia. It claimed to know where Haley's body was an abandoned coal shaft near the state line. But the location was vague, and without physical evidence or coordinates, it was set aside. Investigators chalked it up to the kind of attention-seeking that cold cases often attract. In hindsight, it might have been more. But without the backpack, without that fragment of blood inside the drain pipe, the case remained a puzzle missing too many pieces. Troy Garrison, meanwhile, disappeared in a different way. After Haley's case faded from headlines, he moved out of Red Hollow in 2001, worked odd jobs across 3 states: construction in Tennessee, warehouse shipping in Kentucky, even a brief stint as a night janitor at a high school. Nothing about his record stood out, until 2016. That year, Troy was arrested after a bar fight in Knoxville turned brutal. Witnesses said he slammed a man's head into a jukebox over a game of pool. The victim suffered permanent brain damage. Troy was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 5 years. It was during his intake processing that his DNA was entered into the National CODIS system, the same system that would later trigger a match when Haley's backpack contents were tested in 2019. But for 3 years, that DNA sat in a database, dormant, waiting. That's the part that haunted Lynn the most. He was already locked up, she told a local reporter. If someone had tested that backpack just a few years earlier, maybe I would have known sooner. Maybe I could have buried her. What investigators didn't realize in the early years, or perhaps didn't prioritize, was how small, seemingly trivial details had gone unchecked, like the tire treads found near the mill. They didn't match Haley's Saturn, but were never traced, or the maintenance logs for the textile building, one of which mentioned a broken side lock, logged just a week before Haley vanished. It wasn't negligence. It was the overwhelming flood of speculation that happens when a teenage girl goes missing in a town where nothing ever happens. Every sighting, every rumor, every psychic tip became a distraction. The signal got lost in the noise, and that noise lasted for years. Some claimed they saw Haley hitchhiking in Virginia. Others insisted she was living under a different name out west. In 2003, a woman came forward claiming her daughter was Haley, that she'd run from an abusive home and was ready to come clean. DNA ruled that out quickly. But for 48 hours, Lynn dared to hope, and then collapsed all over again. Troy's family remained in Red Hollow until 2010. They never spoke publicly about the case. His mother, Sandra, once gave a brief interview to a local station, simply saying, "We raised him to be good. I don't know what went wrong." By the time of his confession, they had long since moved and cut ties. Troy's own sister reportedly refused to take his calls once the charges were filed. In one recorded jailhouse phone call, he told a friend, "They all think I'm a monster, but they don't know the whole story, and maybe no one ever would." In 2020, a small documentary crew began filming a project on Haley's case. What started as a college thesis evolved into a 40-minute short titled 12 Minutes to Nowhere. It focused on the psychological ripple effect of unsolved trauma, how it twists through families, investigators, even entire communities. The documentary was quietly released on a regional PBS station. No fanfare. But it struck a nerve. Suddenly, the case was back in public consciousness. People who hadn't spoken in years began reaching out. A former classmate of Haley's emailed producers to say she remembered something strange. The night before Haley vanished, Troy had been sitting in his car outside the school parking lot. Just sitting there, staring. "I thought he was waiting for someone," she said. "But it creeped me out." The documentary didn't bring Haley home. but it rekindled a conversation, one that had been buried too long. In 2021, Lynn returned to Red Hollow for the first time in 15 years. She stood behind the chain-link fence surrounding the former mill site, now cleared and flattened, soon to be a community garden. The drain pipe was gone. The walls were gone. But the air, she said, still felt the same. The wind still sounds like it did that night, she whispered to the film crew. Like it's holding its breath. They asked if she believed Troy had more victims. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. He didn't start with Haley, and I don't think he stopped. That possibility that Haley wasn't the only one remains open. Since 2020, 2 other cold cases from nearby towns have been quietly reopened, one in Burnsville, North Carolina, and another across the border in rural Tennessee. Both involved teenage girls who vanished after leaving work. Both had connections to bus routes Troy might have used. No charges have been filed, but investigators are watching and waiting. In Red Hollow, a new plaque now sits near the old mill foundation. It bears Haley's name, her photo, and a single quote: "She was light, and someone tried to bury it. But light always finds a way." In the spring of 2022, 3 years after Troy Garrison's confession, a detective in Burnsville, North Carolina, stumbled onto something that would reopen old wounds. Her name was Detective Sherry Langston, and she'd been reviewing unsolved cases from the 1,990 seconds as part of a state grant for cold case resolution. One file caught her eye: Emma Price, 17. Missing since August 1996. Emma had disappeared after locking up the video rental store where she worked part-time on weekends. She lived less than 2 blocks away. Just like Haley, she'd told her mom she was coming right home. Just like Haley, her car was later found, keys still in the ignition, purse untouched, parked in an odd but careful way, outside an abandoned grain depot just off Route 9. The similarities weren't just eerie, they were specific. Emma's driver's seat had also been adjusted forward. There were no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints. Her pager was missing. Her name had faded from headlines years ago. But when Langston cross-referenced the case timeline with known residents of Red Hollow, one name came up: Troy Garrison. He'd been working part-time for a maintenance company that serviced several commercial properties in western North Carolina. According to employment records, one of the stops on his rotation included a warehouse just 6 miles from the depot where Emma's car had been found. Langston flagged it. And then she drove 3 hours to meet Lynn Corbin in person. Lynn had grown cautious around police visits. Most led nowhere: apologies, condolences, procedural updates. But this time, she watched Langston open her case file and lay out the side-by-side comparisons. Haley and Emma, 2 girls, same age, same pattern, 1 year apart. It was the first time Lynn had heard another name spoken in the same breath as her daughter's. And it rattled her. "He did it before," she whispered. "Before Haley?" Langston nodded. "We think so, but proving it would be difficult." Emma's case was colder than cold. The original files had missing pages. Evidence like the contents of her purse had been stored in a facility that later flooded in 2003. Her mother, Lorraine Price, had passed away in 2011. No DNA had ever been recovered from her car, and there were no living eyewitnesses. But Langston wasn't ready to let it go. She paid a visit to Riverbend Correctional Facility. Troy didn't recognize her when she walked in. He assumed she was from the parole board. She introduced herself as a detective from Burnsville and mentioned Emma Price's name. His expression didn't change, not at first, but when she slid a photo of Emma across the table, something flickered. Troy leaned forward and whispered, "You don't give up, do you?" Langston held his gaze. "Did you know her?" He shrugged. "Lots of girls looked like that back then, but not all of them ended up dead." Troy smiled. "I didn't say she was dead. It was the closest thing to a confession he would give, and it was enough to warrant reopening the investigation formally." Meanwhile, the documentary 12 Minutes to Nowhere was quietly gaining traction online. A small YouTube upload, just 3,000 views in its first month, began circulating on forums dedicated to unsolved crimes. Viewers started drawing their own connections, scouring old newspapers, digitized police reports, and abandoned local blogs. Reddit threads lit up with theories. Was Troy Garrison a serial killer hiding in plain sight? Were there more victims linked to abandoned buildings? Then came a break no one expected. A user named @JuliePine75 posted a comment on a thread about Emma Price saying, "My older brother used to hang out with a guy named Troy who fixed HVAC units. He always said Troy was weird about girls who worked late shifts. Said he'd make jokes about them going missing someday. Thought it was just bad humor. Now I'm not so sure." Investigators traced the account. It belonged to Julia Larkins, a middle school teacher in Knoxville. Her brother, Anthony Larkins, had worked with Troy at a warehouse job in 1996. When contacted, Anthony confirmed everything. "Yeah," he said during a phone interview. "Troy was strange, quiet until he wasn't. He used to talk about girls in a way that felt off, like possessive, especially when they told him no." Anthony recalled one night when Troy came to work late, dirty and shaking. Said he'd gotten into a fight with a girl who scratched him. He was vague, didn't explain. But that was in August 1996, the same week Emma disappeared. Police never interviewed Anthony back then. No one had connected the dots. Now, everything was beginning to shift. Langston built her case slowly. She gathered Troy's old roots, subpoenaed employment records, and pulled maintenance logs for buildings across multiple counties. In total, she found 4 separate abandoned or unused sites where Troy had access and where teenage girls had vanished between 1995 and 1999. It was no longer a question of coincidence. It was a pattern. But the legal challenge remained. No bodies, no DNA, no confession. That didn't stop Lynn. She began working with a victims advocacy group, giving interviews, doing podcasts, and pushing for a regional task force focused on unsolved missing girls in the Appalachian Corridor. She wasn't content with just a plaque, she wanted answers. For Emma, for the others, for the girls who never made it home from work. "This man," she told a crowd at a 2022 vigil, "has stolen more than lives. He's stolen futures, and we will not stop until every girl he took is brought home." The crowd lit candles, some cried, and across the country, people began to pay attention. By 2023, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation had launched an internal review. 4 new cold cases were flagged. Troy was moved to a higher security unit, placed under watch. He began refusing interviews. Letters sent to his cell were returned unopened. Some theorized he was afraid. Others thought he was savoring the power, the silence. But inside the walls of Riverbend, Troy made one final move. He handed a folded note to a corrections officer. It read, "Stop digging. You won't like where it ends." But the digging wouldn't stop. And beneath the surface of those years, the 90 seconds, the quiet shift from paper files to digital ghosts, lay a trail. A real, documented trail. Of girls like Haley, of girls like Emma, of names that had slipped from memory but not from record. And every step closer brought investigators nearer to one final question: how many girls never made it home? Because of Troy Garrison. On a chilly morning in March 2024, an amateur hiking group called Wilderness for Wellness set out to clear a neglected section of trail in Cherokee National Forest, roughly 50 miles from Red Hollow. The group, made up mostly of retired veterans and park volunteers, was prepping the trail for spring visitors. That stretch hadn't seen consistent use in over a decade, overgrown, eroded, and forgotten. Just before noon, one of the hikers, a woman named Marie Crenshaw, veered slightly off trail to photograph a moss-covered stone she thought looked like a face, but what she found wasn't stone. It was bone, a small, delicate femur, partially buried beneath roots, next to the tattered remains of a nylon windbreaker. The jacket was sun-faded and torn, but had a faint logo still visible on the chest: Valley Video and Rental. The same store where Emma Price had worked. Marie radioed the others, who called it in immediately. Within 24 hours, the site was cordoned off with crime scene tape. Forensic teams arrived from Asheville and Knoxville. They uncovered more bones over several days: ribs, jaw fragments, a partial spine, a backpack filled with degraded notebooks, lip balm, and one cracked keychain, a miniature VHS tape with the word Emma painted in purple nail polish. It took 2 weeks to confirm through dental records and DNA. The remains were Emma Price. She had been just 2 miles from a back road that ran along a former service route used by maintenance trucks in the late 1992s, one of the routes Troy Garrison had serviced as part of his HVAC job. Detective Sherry Langston, who had reopened Emma's case just 2 years earlier, stood in silence at the forest edge as the coroner's van pulled away. "It's like she was waiting," she whispered. "Like she knew we were finally coming." The discovery of Emma's remains shifted everything. Suddenly, there was a body, evidence, a physical link. But what made the discovery even more disturbing was the condition of the burial site. The grave was shallow, hastily covered with brush. No attempt had been made to truly hide her. Yet she'd gone undetected for 28 years. Near the remains, forensic techs found a rusted metal tag, a key ID for an HVAC lockbox, stamped with an old contractor code. The code was still in use in 1996, and it belonged to the company Troy had worked for. That tag placed him within yards of the crime scene. Troy was re-questioned in April 2024, but this time, he didn't speak. His lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named Holtz, simply said, "My client has nothing further to say about events that far back." Troy, once smug in interrogation, now stared blankly ahead. He didn't blink, he didn't smile. Detectives noticed bruises along his arms. Inmate records later confirmed he'd been in 2 altercations inside Riverbend, one with another prisoner, and one with a guard. He was transferred to solitary, and there, he began writing. Corrections officers discovered a stack of notebooks under his mattress during a contraband sweep. Dozens of pages, drawings, maps, lists of names, ramblings. Some seemed coherent, others were pure delusion. But buried within the pages were clues, real ones. One page contained the words, 9/7, she smiled. 9/12, she called her mom. 9/28, she stopped breathing. The timeline perfectly matched Haley Corbin's disappearance. Another page had a rough sketch of a forest path marked with EP and a tiny symbol resembling a VHS tape. It wasn't a confession, but it was something. Prosecutors seized the journals. Analysts and forensic psychologists were brought in to parse through them. They found references to 5 additional women. Some were only initials. Some were first names. One simply said, "Train girl, blonde, talk too loud." That girl was never identified. But one entry hit hard. "She told me no. I told her I'd see her after work. She didn't believe me. But I was right." It was dated the 16th of July, 1997, the day before Haley vanished. Lynn Corbin was called in to review the pages. She asked for a room alone. No cameras, no press, just her and the notebooks. She stayed in there for nearly 2 hours. When she emerged, she was crying. Not from sadness, she said, but exhaustion. He wrote about her like she was his, she said. Like he owned her. Like she owed him something. She paused. It wasn't a crime to him. It was a rejection. In May 2024, with the discovery of Emma's remains and Troy's writings, a second murder charge was filed. This time, the indictment came with the weight of evidence. The DA's office issued a public statement. "We believe Mr. Garrison is responsible for at least 2 homicides, and we are actively pursuing investigative leads connected to others." The FBI joined the task force, and the media descended. Netflix, which had passed on the original 12 Minutes to Nowhere documentary, now commissioned a limited series. Suddenly, Red Hollow wasn't just a quiet town with a tragic memory. It was the center of a sprawling, decades-old hunt for the truth and possibly one of America's most overlooked serial offenders. But beneath the headlines, something darker lingered. Not every name in Troy's journals could be traced. Some of the initials led to dead ends. Some might have been fantasy. But 2 matched known missing persons cases. Marissa Duval, 19, vanished from Kingsport, TN, in 1995, last seen leaving her fast food job. Danielle Broom, 18, disappeared from Spruce Pine, NC, in 1998. Her car was found near an old rail depot. Both locations were within Troy's known travel routes. Both cases had gone cold. Now, both were reclassified as suspected homicides. For the first time in over 2 decades, Haley and Emma's stories were pushing others into the light. And though the justice system had limits, parole hearings, aging records, expired evidence, one thing had changed permanently. Troy Garrison was no longer just the man who followed a girl home one night. He was now suspected of being something far worse and far more dangerous. In Red Hollow, the wind still whispered through the trees, but now, people listened. In late July 2024, just days after the second indictment against Troy Garrison, an unexpected call came into the Red Hollow Sheriff's Department. A man named Calvin Ellis, now 62, claimed he had worked part-time security at the old Red Hollow textile mill in the late 90s. He'd left town long ago, but said he had been following the case since it resurfaced on the news. "I think I saw something back then," he said. "And I think it's time I finally said it out loud." Detectives met him at a quiet motel off I-40, where Calvin, now retired and visibly shaken, unfolded a yellowed security log from August 1997, a full month after Haley's disappearance. On August 21st, he had noted in his logbook, "White male, early 22nd, parked near East Dock around 3:15 a. Returned 45 minutes later carrying what looked like a toolbox and something wrapped in cloth. Didn't recognize him, but he moved like he belonged there. Calvin never reported it. Why? Back then I didn't want to rock the boat," he admitted. "I was a temp, minimum wage. You see a lot of weird stuff working night security. But I never forgot it." He walked like he had a secret. Investigators cross-referenced the timestamp with weather data. It had rained that night, a heavy downpour that likely erased any footprints or tire impressions. But the east loading dock was the same area where Haley's car had been found. And the direction the man had walked toward the mill's old water system matched the location of the sealed drain pipe. It was the first eyewitness to place someone near the dump site. And it came nearly 27 years too late. But Calvin had one more thing. He said that in 1999, before the mill shut down for good, he'd helped board up a back room used for storage. The door had been jammed, shut, swollen from humidity, and Calvin remembered seeing something wedged inside. A dirty red rag, a broken shoelace, and a scrap of what looked like a paper tag. He assumed it was junk. Now, he believed it might have been part of what Troy used to bind Haley before moving her. Detectives requested access to the mill's storage logs and blueprints now housed in a state archive. What they found was overlooked in every prior search: a sub-basement beneath the rear section of the building, mislabeled as utility vault, sealed. It had never been excavated or searched during the initial investigation, because on every map after 2003, that room didn't exist anymore. On August 9, 2024, a specialized excavation, the team arrived at the overgrown lot where the mill once stood. They used ground-penetrating radar to scan the soil where the rear wall had collapsed decades earlier. At approximately 3:47 p.m., the equipment registered a large, square void about 8 feet underground just behind where the sealed drain pipe had been. Crews began digging. They found concrete, then rusted metal piping. Then, finally, a caved-in hatch door leading into what looked like a flooded, partially collapsed crawl space. Inside, they recovered several heavily degraded objects: a plastic hairbrush with long, light brown strands, a cracked pager identical to Haley's likely discarded after the first, a single sneaker, child-sized, consistent with what Haley's mother had described she wore that night, and most disturbingly, a small bracelet engraved with the initials, H.C. It was the bracelet Haley had gotten for her 16th birthday, just 3 months before she vanished. Haley Corbin identified it immediately. "I gave it to her the morning of her birthday," she said, tears in her eyes. She never took it off. There were no full skeletal remains in the chamber, likely lost to time, erosion, and flooding, but there were fragments, enough to run DNA tests, enough to confirm what everyone feared. The chamber had been her second resting place. Troy hadn't lied in his confession, not entirely. He had, in fact, moved her body after placing the backpack in the drain pipe, but he hadn't buried her in the woods. He'd buried her beneath the mill itself in a forgotten room that only someone who knew the building inside and out would think to use. He didn't panic. He planned. And for over 2 decades, He'd gotten away with it. The media storm reignited. Headlines read, Haley Corbin finally found sub-basement discovery confirms 1,997 murder site. A public vigil was held at the site. Hundreds of people came, many who had never even known Haley, carrying candles, wearing blue ribbons, and holding signs that read, "She was never forgotten. Say her name. Justice." Finally, Lynn Corbin spoke again, her voice steadier this time. "For 27 years I've lived every day with a question mark," she said. "Now I finally have a period. My daughter was taken, but she's no longer lost, and neither am I." Back at Riverbend Correctional, Troy was notified of the discovery. He said nothing. Didn't request to speak to anyone. Didn't request a lawyer. Didn't flinch. But that night, he was found standing in the corner of his cell, unmoving, whispering something repeatedly under his breath. Guards reported hearing, "They were all just girls. They were just girls." Forensic psychologists believe Troy kept trophies, tiny mementos from his victims, the bracelet, the notebook page, possibly others, items that meant nothing to anyone but him, tokens of power, of control. And when he moved Haley to the chamber beneath the mill, it wasn't to hide her, it was to keep her close. The drain pipe wasn't just a disposal method, it was a monument. With the discovery of Haley's final resting place, Troy Garrison was officially charged with first-degree murder and labeled by the North Carolina Attorney General as a serial predator hiding in plain sight. Two additional cases, Danielle Broome and Marissa Duval, were reclassified as connected homicides under an FBI multi-state task force. And in early September 2024, Netflix announced a 6-part docuseries titled 12 Minutes to Nowhere, The Hidden Killings of Troy Garrison. But no documentary, no courtroom, no confession could ever undo what had been lost. What mattered now was acknowledgement, truth. A story that had gone cold was finally warm again. In a quiet grove near the rebuilt Red Hollow Town Center, a new memorial was erected not just for Haley, but for Emma and the other unnamed, unconfirmed victims of a man who had blended into the background for too long. Carved into the granite were these words, "You may have silenced their voices, but now the world is listening." In November 2024, 27 years after Haley Corbin vanished, her family finally laid her to rest. It was a quiet, overcast morning in Asheville. The service was private, just Lynn, a few extended family members, and a handful of Haley's childhood friends who had stayed in touch over the years. There was no casket, only a cedar urn containing the bone fragments recovered from the mill's sub-basement, wrapped in a pale blue cloth, the color Haley had once painted her bedroom walls. Beside it sat her silver bracelet, polished, repaired, placed gently on a velvet cushion. The service didn't focus on Troy. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about Haley, the daughter who loved vanilla milkshakes and couldn't sleep without the sound of a fan, the teenager who had dreams of becoming a school teacher, the girl whose life had been defined not by what happened to her, but by the love that refused to let her be forgotten. After the ceremony, Lynn Corbin released a statement. "For so many years, my world was frozen in 1997, but now, with Haley home, I can begin again. She is no longer lost. She is no longer waiting." She later added something off-script, spoken directly to the camera. "If you have someone missing, don't let the world forget. Keep asking, keep knocking. Even when the trail goes cold, keep walking." The response to Haley's story was global. Within 48 hours of Netflix releasing the 12 Minutes to Nowhere docuseries, it shot to number 3 inches the US and number 1 inch several countries. Social media flooded with messages of support, candlelight photos, and posts bearing the hashtag #NumberForHaley. Journalists revisited the cases of Danielle Broome, Marissa Duval, and several other unsolved disappearances from the Appalachian region. The FBI officially announced a dedicated Appalachian cold case unit, with full funding and digital forensic resources. Their focus: long-haul trucker routes, abandoned industrial sites, and former maintenance workers with cross-state employment records in the 1,990 seconds. In December, 2 more cold cases were reopened in Tennessee, Both had eerie similarities to the known Garrison cases: young women vanishing late at night, cars parked in odd but orderly places, with personal belongings left untouched. For the first time, investigators felt they had a framework, a behavioral map of someone who had hidden behind routine jobs and casual conversation for decades. A man who moved through the world unnoticed, until it was too late. Back inside Riverbend Correctional, Troy Garrison was transferred to permanent solitary confinement, not because he was violent, but because other inmates now knew who he really was. He had become infamous not in the way serial killers dream of, but in the way cowards are remembered, a name spoken with contempt. His crimes weren't dramatic. They weren't even clever. They were quiet, calculated, opportunistic. He didn't hunt in alleys or use weapons. He waited until someone let their guard down, until someone trusted him, then he took. And now, he sat in a windowless cell with nothing but his own words echoing in his head. Correctional staff reported that he stopped speaking altogether in January 2025. He ate, slept, followed orders, but he never said another word, not even when handed another indictment, not even when shown photos of Emma's recovered belongings, not even when told, "We know about Marissa now." But some answers still remained just out of reach. Not all the initials in Troy's journals were identified. Not every name could be matched to a known case. Some families still wait, clinging to the hope that one day, a storm will wash up the final piece, the final bone, the final clue. And some believe Troy took more than he ever wrote down. In an exclusive interview with Frontline, former lead investigator Detective Owens said, "There's a strong possibility that Garrison's total victim count is higher than we'll ever prove. He knew how to disappear, and how to make others disappear too." The documentary ended on that haunting thought, not as a warning but as a challenge. In Red Hollow, the transformation was slow but deliberate. The old mill site was turned into a memorial park with walking paths, native gardens, and an amphitheater for community gatherings. At the center, beside a weeping cherry tree, sits a stone bench, engraved with the names of Haley, Emma, and a single line beneath them, "And all those still waiting to be found." Teenagers now visit on school trips. Locals bring flowers. Sometimes strangers come, just to sit. Sometimes they leave letters. Haley Corbin now volunteers with the Doe Network, helping connect families of the missing with resources, investigators, and forensic specialists. She speaks at conferences. She teaches law enforcement agencies how to listen, not just record. She's become something Haley never had the chance to be, a teacher. But she never calls herself that. "I'm just a mom," she says. A mom who didn't give up. In March 2025, Haley would have turned 44. Lynn baked a small cake and took it to the memorial. She sat on the bench with her hand on the engraving and whispered, "Happy birthday, baby girl. You're home now." The wind rustled through the cherry blossoms. Somewhere far away, another mother waited. Another trail sat cold. But Haley's story and the noise it made ensured that someone would keep walking. Because silence is what lets killers hide, and stories like Haley's are what drag them into the light.